Ladies and gentlemen, I stand before you today with a message of deep significance, one that transcends the realm of folklore and myth, one that touches the very core of our existence. Today, we are going to talk about the 5 marks of a witch, not in the way that we have often heard in stories or superstitions, but in a way that speaks to the spiritual, mental, and emotional forces that influence us all. A witch, my friends, is not defined by the traditional images of broomsticks or pointed hats, nor are they bound by the confines of ancient stories. No, a witch is one who seeks to alter the natural course of life and manipulate the forces around them for their own purposes. Let us explore the first of these marks. The mark of a witch is the desire for control. Witches seek not just power, but dominion. They are not satisfied with simple influence. They want to govern, to shape, to dominate. They seek to control people, circumstances, and environments. Where there is life, they wish to assert their will. This is the first and most dangerous mark. Control is the precursor to manipulation, and manipulation breeds destruction. But there is a deeper aspect to this. Control is not just about power over others. It is about the fear that comes with it. Those who seek to control are often motivated by an intense fear of losing what they have. And so they manipulate, they deceive, and they dominate. Power is not necessarily the result of insight. It is exacerbated by temperance. The mark of a witch is deception. Witches thrive in secrecy. They work in the shadows, pulling strings from behind the curtain. They do not wish for the truth to be exposed, because truth reveals their intentions. Deception, therefore, is their greatest tool. They hide behind half-truths, lies, and illusions. They twist perceptions, leading others to believe in false realities. This is how they maintain their influence, by keeping others in the dark, away from the light of understanding. Mark of the vision, resistance to change. Witches are agents of stagnation. While the world moves forward, they try to pull things backward. Growth, change, progress, these are the enemies of a witch. They resist transformation because transformation empowers people, and empowered people cannot be controlled. They work to keep us trapped in old patterns, held captive by fear, uncertainty, and insecurity. This mark is one of the most insidious because it can manifest in the smallest ways. Whether in the personal lives of individuals or in the larger social structures around us, witches seek to halt progress by fostering negativity and keeping us anchored to the past. They do not want us to grow because growth threatens their control. The mark of a witch is the manipulation of fear. Witches understand one thing: fear is the most powerful weapon they have. Fear paralyzes us. Fear keeps us from taking action. Fear makes us doubt ourselves, our capabilities, and our potential. Witches know this, and they use fear to keep us in check. Fear prevents us from stepping out. Fear prevents us from stepping out, from stepping up, from realizing the full extent of who we are and what we are capable of achieving. And this is why the witch seeks to create an atmosphere of fear. Because when we are afraid, we are weak. When we are afraid, we are hesitant. When we are afraid, we do not act with power. The mark of a witch is the attempt to deprive us of our power. Okay. The true counter to a witch's control, deception, stagnation, and fear is the empowerment of the individual. Witches try to rob us of our potential, to make us believe we are powerless. They try to convince us that we are victims, that we are weak, that we cannot rise above our circumstances. But this is the greatest deception of all. We were not created to be weak. We were not created to be slaves to fear. We were created to overcome. We were created to grow, to learn, to innovate, and to transform our world. When we recognize these marks of a witch, control, deception, stagnation, and fear, we must choose a different path. We must choose the path of empowerment. And here lies the key to breaking free from the influence of the witch: the pursuit of truth. The truth will always set us free. The truth will expose deception, overcome fear, and bring us into the fullness of our potential. Ladies and gentlemen, it is time for us to recognize the marks of a witch in our own lives and in the world around us. It is time for us to stop living in fear, to stop being manipulated, to stop allowing others to control our destiny. It is time for us to embrace our true power and rise to our highest potential. And the highest potential, when we think of a witch, many of us immediately picture an image steeped in folklore. An old woman with a crooked nose, a pointy hat, and a broomstick. A witch, at its essence, is not merely a character of fantasy. It is a symbol of influence, power, and control. It is a representation of the darker forces in our world that seek to manipulate, dominate, and distort reality. The witch, in its most spiritual and metaphysical sense, is someone who taps into the hidden currents of power, whether natural, supernatural, or psychological, and uses that energy for a personal or collective agenda. In ancient times, witches were thought to possess knowledge and wisdom that others did not understand. This wisdom was often tied to the natural world: plants, herbs, the moon, the stars, and the unseen forces that govern life. But as society evolved, the role of the witch became more associated with mystery, manipulation, and at times, fear. Witches were seen as those who sought power outside of the natural order, sometimes bending the laws of nature to their will, and other times working to disrupt the harmony of the universe. Now, they said that beyond these external perceptions, it's important to recognize that the true nature of a witch, whether in ancient civilizations, in folklore, and modern psychology, can also be understood as a symbol of inner power. In many cultures, the witch is seen not as someone who wields power over others, but someone who wields power within. The power of the mind, the spirit, and the emotion. Witches, in this sense, represent the forces that can either elevate or destroy, heal or harm, depending on how that power is used. A witch's influence doesn't always have to be overt or visible. Much of their power lies in the subtle realms, in the mind, in perception, in belief. And because of this, the concept of a witch extends beyond the individual. It can be seen in the systems that control societies, the institutions that manipulate public thought, and the unseen forces that shape our destinies. The witch, in this context, represents those who, knowingly or unknowingly manipulate these forces to their advantage, whether for good or ill. Crimes and punishment, in understanding of which we must move past external images and acknowledge the deeper, more pervasive influence that such forces have on us all. The true nature of a witch is found not in a broomstick or cauldron, but in the way power is wielded. Through control, deception, stagnation, and fear. And as we examine these forces, we can better understand not only the witches around us, but also the witches within us, and how we can empower ourselves to rise above their influence. A witch, in its deepest essence, is not content with mere influence. They desire to control. Control is at the heart of what makes a witch dangerous, for it is the force that drives their actions, whether subtle or overt. A witch does not simply want power for the sake of power, but rather for the sake of domination. The ability to shape, to command, and to dictate the course of events, lives, and even entire environments. This desire for control often begins in a seemingly innocuous way. A witch may start by manipulating small situations, testing their ability to influence the choices and behaviors of others. Yet, as they discover the potency of their influence, they become consumed by it. They learn that control is not just about getting others to do what they want in a single moment, but rather about altering the course of their lives in a way that forces them into patterns, limiting their potential and tying them to the witch's will. In this sense, a witch's control is not simply about an isolated incident. It's about changing the very structure of a person's life, thoughts, and emotions. What makes the witch's control so powerful is that it is rarely achieved through brute force. Instead, it is often subtle, clever, and calculated. A witch understands the human mind deeply, the fears, the desires, the insecurities, and knows how to manipulate these emotions to create a state of dependency. Through this dependency, the witch secures their dominance. They don't just want to control people's actions. They want to control their hearts, their minds, and their sense of self-worth. Control manifests in different forms. Sometimes it is seen in the form of coercion, where a witch forces others into compliance through threats, intimidation, or emotional manipulation. Other times, control can be more passive, through guilt, shame, or the spreading of doubt and confusion. A witch might craft scenarios that plant seeds of uncertainty, causing others to question their own judgment and second-guess their decisions. As doubt creeps in, the witch's power grows, because those under their influence no longer trust their own instincts. The more they doubt themselves, the more they begin to rely on the witch to provide direction. But control does not only happen in personal relationships. A witch, whether an individual or an institution, seeks to control entire systems, whether social, political, or spiritual. By influencing public perception, controlling narratives, or managing information, they shape the world in ways that suit their interests. In this way, witches become architects of societal structures, dictating the flow of resources, opportunities, and even the direction of entire movement. By creating a sense of helplessness in the masses, they position themselves as the saviors, the gatekeepers, the ones who alone hold the power to decide who gets to thrive and who gets to suffer. The deeper danger, however, is not just the control they exert over others, but the control they exert over themselves. A witch's desire for power often blinds them to their own inner needs and weaknesses. Their obsession with controlling others is, in many cases, a desperate attempt to avoid confronting their own fears and insecurities. They create elaborate systems of control as a means of masking the deep void or uncertainty within themselves. See, that the more they tighten their grip on the outside world, the more they suffocate their own growth and potential. The witch, in trying to control everything, ends up trapped in a prison of their own making. Some of you are now in a vision of their own making. And so, the witch seeks control not because they are invincible, but because they are deeply vulnerable. The need to control is driven by a fear of chaos, a fear of losing power, and ultimately, a fear of being exposed for their true selves. They hide behind control because they fear what lies beyond it, the unknown, the uncontrollable, and the wild freedom that comes with relinquishing power. And in this pursuit of control, they also bind others to that same fear, trapping them in a cycle of dependence and suppression. It is this insatiable thirst for control that makes witches so dangerous. They want to dictate not only the present, but also the future. They aim to create systems that lock others into a perpetual state of vulnerability, insecurity, and obedience. The true strength of a witch lies not in their ability to control one person or one situation, but in their capacity to shape entire lives, entire worlds, through subtle, pervasive manipulation. To them, control is not just an end, it is a way of life. And it is the means through which they justify their existence, their power, and their influence over the world around them. So control is when you have the power and you have the influence over the world around them. Deception is one of the most powerful and insidious tools in a witch's arsenal. It is not a tool they wield casually but with precision, using it to shape reality, manipulate perceptions, and create illusions that bind others to their will. The art of deception goes beyond simple lies or half-truths. It is a complex and subtle craft, one that operates in the shadows of the mind, in the spaces between what is said and what is left unsaid. For a witch, deception isn't just about misleading others, it's about controlling their perceptions of truth itself. At its core, deception works by obscuring the real from the apparent. A witch knows that the world is often seen through a veil of bias, fear, and emotion. And they leverage these human tendencies to twist what is real into something that serves their agenda. They understand that perception is as powerful, if not more so, than reality. By altering perception, they can make the unreal seem tangible and the impossible appear achievable. This is why witches often operate in secrecy, behind closed doors, creating scenarios that seem to align with a natural order, when in fact, they are carefully crafted illusions meant to mislead and control. The beauty of deception is that it doesn't always involve outright lies. It can be a subtle distortion, a slight manipulation of the truth that makes people believe they're seeing what is not actually there. A witch might speak in half-truths, leaving out key details that would expose their motives or intentions. In other cases, they might build an entire narrative around false assumptions presenting situations in such a way that the audience fills in the gaps themselves, often arriving at conclusions that suit the witch's purposes. The further the ancient text gets into the story, the more aggressive it becomes. Deception thrives in the space between certainty and doubt. A witch uses this space to plant seeds of confusion, casting doubt where there should be clarity and creating uncertainty where there should be confidence. It is the doubt, the feeling of not quite knowing what is true, that leaves people vulnerable to manipulation. When a person is unsure of what to believe, they are more likely to trust the one who appears to offer clarity, the one who presents themselves as the answer to their confusion. This is when the witch's power is most effective, when they make themselves the authority in a world full of contradictions, offering a false sense of security to those who are lost in the fog of uncertainty. One of the most dangerous aspects of deception is how it preys on human emotions. Fear, desire, pride, and guilt are all emotions that can be easily manipulated through deception. A witch knows that by playing on these emotions, they can steer people toward actions and decisions that might otherwise be outside of their natural inclinations. By presenting a scenario that appeals to a person's deepest fears or desires, the witch can control their choices without ever forcing them. For example, if a witch wants to gain someone's loyalty, they may first create a sense of insecurity in that person's life, making them feel as though they are alone or powerless. Then the witch offers a solution, often a false one, that seems like the only way out of their troubles. The person, in their vulnerability, takes the bait, never realizing that they've been led down a path that ultimately serves the witch's needs and not their own. This psychological manipulation is often so subtle that the victim does not even realize they are being deceived. They may believe that they are making their own decisions, exercising their own free will, but in reality, their perceptions have been shaped by the witch's carefully orchestrated influence. This is the power of deception. It makes people feel as though they are in control when in fact they are not. They have various beliefs. It makes people feel as though they are making their own decisions. It makes people feel as though they are making their own decisions. It leads them to believe that they are following their own instincts, when those instincts have been shaped and guided by someone else all along. The power of deception also lies in its ability to remain undetected. A witch's skill is not only in deceiving others, but in doing so in a way that leaves no trace. They are experts at covering their tracks, leaving behind just enough evidence to support their illusion, but never enough to expose the truth. This is why witches are often seen as elusive and mysterious figures. They do not leave a trail that can be easily followed. They understand that the best lies are those that are believed without question. And the best illusions are those that are never questioned at all. The witch use of deception is not just about getting what they want in the moment. It is about creating a system of influence that extends over time, a web of lies and illusions that keep others ensnared. Once a person has been deceived, their ability to perceive truth becomes clouded. They begin to question their own judgment, their own instincts, and their own reality. The witch, in turn, becomes a constant point of reference, the one whose version of events becomes the truth they trust. Deception for the witch is not just a tactic. It is a way of life. It is the means by which they navigate the world, manipulating the forces around them to maintain their control. The witch is a master of illusion, an architect of perception, and a manipulator of truth. And once deception takes root in a person's mind, it is incredibly difficult to uproot. It lingers in the shadows, often without the victim ever realizing they have been deceived, shaping their world and their decisions in ways they cannot even see. This is why it is so important to recognize the marks of deception, to learn to see through the smoke and mirrors, to seek clarity in a world that often obscures truth. The witch's deception thrives on ignorance and confusion. And it is only by shining the light of awareness and truth that we can begin to dismantle the illusions they create. A witch, whether in the traditional sense or in a more metaphorical context, is often defined by their resistance to change and growth. This resistance is not merely a passive unwillingness to embrace new ideas or opportunities. It is an active force that works against the natural flow of transformation, both on a personal and societal level. The witch seeks to create stagnation, to hold things in place, to prevent the inevitable currents of progress from sweeping away the old structures, the old ways of thinking, and the old limitations. This resistance to change can manifest in a variety of ways. Sometimes it appears as fear. Fear of the unknown, fear of losing control, fear of the new. The witch is terrified of what might come with change because it represents a loss of power, a threat to their carefully constructed system of influence. Change brings unpredictability, and unpredictability for a witch is dangerous. The witch thrives in environments where things are predictable, where people are stuck in routines, and where everything stays within established boundaries. Change, however, forces things out of these boundaries and introduces new possibilities, new opportunities, and new ways of thinking. And this is what the witch cannot tolerate. This resistance to growth is not always about fighting against external circumstances. It is often an internal force rooted deep within the witch's psyche. Growth in its truest sense requires self-awareness, vulnerability, and the ability to let go of old identities, old patterns, and old fears. For the witch, this kind of personal transformation is terrifying because it means shedding the very things that give them a sense of control. Growth requires change at the core level, and the witch's deepest fear is the dissolution of their power, even if that power is ultimately built on a foundation of fear and deception. When a person resists growth, they cling to their comfort zones, to what they know, because the unknown is too threatening. A witch, in this sense, becomes a master of keeping people in their comfort zones. They subtly reinforce old beliefs, perpetuate old patterns of thought, and create an environment in which the status quo is always safe, even if it is limiting. The witch encourages others to remain where they are because the moment they begin to question or step outside of their established boundaries, they open themselves up to change. And change is the enemy of the witch. At a larger societal level, witches resist growth and change because they fear the collective power of a transformation. They fear a society that is aware, conscious, and empowered. They fear a society that is willing to evolve, to let go of outdated systems and ways of thinking. The witch benefits from the stagnation of society, from its inability to break free from old structures that keep people divided, fearful, and controlled. As long as society resists change, as long as it is trapped in outdated systems, the witch's power is safe. But once people begin to question, to challenge, to seek progress, the witch's hold begins to weaken. Our effort to bring witchcraft back into the light begins to slide back into the... This resistance to growth also manifests in the witch's approach to individuals. The witch does not want others to flourish, because a flourishing of others would mean the diminishment of their own power. If a person begins to grow, whether emotionally, spiritually, or intellectually, they might outgrow the influence of the witch. This is why witches subtly encourage dependency. They want others to remain small, to remain fearful, to remain stuck in their old ways of thinking. Because a person who is stagnant is a person who is easier to control. Growth creates independence. And independence is anathema to the witch's agenda. When people grow, they begin to realize their own strength and potential. They begin to see beyond the lies, the manipulation, and the fear that have kept them bound. The witch understands that true personal growth leads to freedom, and freedom is the ultimate threat to their power. The resistance to change and growth often takes the form of discouragement and negativity. The witch works to instill doubt in those who are on the brink of transformation, whispering words of discouragement or planting seeds of fear. It's too risky, they might say. You're not capable of that. The witch plays on the insecurities and self-doubt of others, keeping them tethered to the familiar, even if that familiarity is toxic or limiting. The witch knows that if they can keep someone from evolving, from reaching their potential, they can keep that person in a state of subjugation. And so they continue to resist change, not through direct opposition, but through subtle manipulation and the creation of fear. This external resistance, the witch also sabotages personal growth by encouraging a fixed mindset in others. A fixed mindset is one that sees abilities, intelligence, and potential as fixed traits that cannot be changed. The witch fosters this mindset by discouraging risk-taking, by reinforcing the belief that failure is something to be feared rather than embraced as part of the growth process. When individuals are convinced that they are incapable of change, they give up on their aspirations. They settle into complacency, believing that their circumstances are permanent and that their potential is limited. This, of course, plays right into the witch's hands, because complacency keeps people from challenging the status quo and seeking something better. The witch's resistance to growth is often tied to the desire to preserve the past. For the witch, the past represents a time when control was absolute, when they held power and influence over others without challenge. Change, especially societal change, represents a threat to that dominance. The witch wants to preserve old paradigms, old ways of thinking, and old systems, even if those systems are inherently flawed or unjust. By resisting change, the witch ensures that the past continues to dictate the present, keeping others from evolving beyond the limitations that have been imposed upon them. The witch's resistance to change and growth is driven by fear, a fear of losing control, a fear of losing power, and a fear of being exposed for what they truly are. Change and growth are forces that undermine the witch's carefully constructed world. They create instability, disrupt the status quo, and introduce new possibilities that threaten the witch's dominance. The witch, therefore, will do whatever they can to prevent these forces from taking root, using manipulation, fear, and control to stifle growth in others. And as long as they are successful, they continue to maintain their grip on power. But once the cycle of stagnation is broken and growth begins, the witch's power starts to fade, unable to withstand the force of personal and collective transformation. Make. Fear is the foundation upon which a witch builds their influence. It is the currency with which they purchase control, and it is the weapon they wield to keep others weak, disempowered, and submissive. A witch does not thrive in love or trust or peace. They thrive in the chaos of fear, for fear clouds judgment, weakens resolve, and creates a fertile ground for manipulation. Fear is the lens through which the witch views the world, and it is the tool through which they manipulate others. In many ways, fear is the witch's greatest ally, and they are masters at cultivating it in others. Fear for the witch is not always loud or obvious. It can be a quiet, insidious presence, an undercurrent of anxiety, uncertainty, and doubt. The witch does not need to scream or threaten directly. They understand that fear does not always need to be seen to be effective. It only needs to be felt. A witch plants the seeds of fear in subtle ways, through suggestion, through omission, through creating situations where the unknown lurks just beneath the surface. It is this constant feeling of uncertainty and vulnerability that keeps people from acting boldly, from stepping into their power, and from realizing their potential. The witch feeds on this paralysis because it keeps others in a state of dependency, always looking for reassurance and protection, always uncertain of their own strength. The witch understands that fear is not just an emotional response, it is a psychological and spiritual one. Fear triggers deep primal instincts of self-preservation. When we are afraid, we are more likely to follow the path of least resistance, to retreat, to cling to what is familiar, even if it is toxic or limiting. Fear makes us small. It keeps us from taking risks, from reaching for higher aspirations, and from challenging the systems that keep us imprisoned. The witch knows that when fear takes root, it can paralyze a person's spirit, preventing them from pursuing their dreams, breaking free from old patterns, or even recognizing their own potential. What is more dangerous is that fear often distorts perception. When we are afraid, we begin to see threats where there are none. We begin to imagine dangers that do not exist, to exaggerate risks, and to magnify the negative possibilities. The witch exploits this by magnifying our deepest fears, making us believe that the world is far more dangerous, uncertain, and threatening than it really is. They create a narrative where the worst case scenario is always just around the corner. And the only way to avoid it is to obey, to conform, and to remain under their influence. In this way, fear becomes a trap, one that keeps us from thinking critically, acting courageously, or seeing through the lies we are told. A witch also thrives in fear because it isolates people. Fear makes us pull inward. It makes us distrust others, hide our vulnerabilities, and avoid connection. It keeps us from seeking support, from standing together in unity, and from building communities that might challenge the witch's power. The witch knows that the more isolated someone is, the easier it is to control them. When we are afraid, we tend to retreat into ourselves, convinced that the world is hostile and that no one can be trusted. We become suspicious of others, hesitant to share our struggles or our dreams. And in that silence and isolation, the witch's influence grows stronger. Fear is also the ultimate tool for undermining confidence and self-worth. The witch understands that when people are afraid, they begin to doubt themselves. They start to question their abilities, their judgment, and their value. Fear eats away at self-esteem, convincing people that they are not capable, not worthy, or not strong enough to face whatever challenges come their way. The witch capitalizes on this by amplifying the fears and insecurities that already exist within a person. By creating environments of fear and doubt, the witch leads others to believe that they are powerless, that they cannot rise above their circumstances, and that the only way to survive is to surrender to the witch's control. The witch thrives when people are convinced of their own inadequacy. For it is in this place of self-doubt that they can be easily manipulated. What is even more dangerous is that fear often leads to inaction, and inaction is what keeps people in a state of perpetual suffering. When we are afraid, we freeze, we hesitate, we overthink. We become so paralyzed by what might happen that we do nothing at all. The witch thrives in this paralysis because it keeps people from taking the steps they need to change their lives, to assert their power, or to challenge the status quo. Fear keeps people in their place. It keeps them stuck, trapped in a cycle of indecision, always waiting for the right moment that never comes. And the witch knows that as long as people remain stuck, they remain under their control. The witch's ability to manipulate fear is not limited to individuals. Entire communities, nations, and movements can be held captive by the collective fear that the witch stirs up. Fear becomes a tool of social control, whether through the manipulation of media, the spreading of rumors, or the instilling of a general sense of anxiety about the future. The witch knows that when society is gripped by fear, it becomes easier to manipulate the masses, to control their behavior, to make them believe that there is only one solution to their problems. The solution the witch offers. Fear creates an environment in which people are willing to surrender their power, to sacrifice their freedoms, and to trust in the witch's promises of safety and security, even when those promises are false. The witch therefore thrives in fear because it is the perfect breeding ground for control, dependency, and stagnation. Fear keeps people small, uncertain, and divided. It forces them to seek out external solutions rather than tapping into their own inner strength. It distorts reality, making the impossible seem inevitable and the unknown seem insurmountable. Fear traps people in a cycle of inaction, self-doubt, and dependence. And in that state of paralysis, the witch's power flourishes. The witch, to maintain their control, they must keep fear alive, constantly reminding people of the threats that lurk around every corner and of the dangers that lie just beyond their reach. Only when we confront our fears, when we rise above them, and when we refuse to be held captive by them, do we begin to break the chains that bind us. Fear is the witch's greatest tool, but it is also the most powerful force we can overcome. The witch's power is rooted in their ability to control, deceive, resist growth, and thrive in fear. These forces, fear, manipulation, stagnation, and control are not just tools of influence, but the very chains that keep individuals and societies trapped in cycles of limitation and disempowerment. The witch does not thrive because of their strength alone. The witch does not thrive because of their strength alone, but because they can make others believe they are powerless, that they are incapable of breaking free from the illusions they create. But here's the powerful truth we must remember. The witch can only control what we allow them to control. They can only deceive us when we remain unaware. They can only resist change if we choose to stay stuck. And they can only thrive in fear when we refuse to face it, rise above it, and walk through it with courage. They can only thrive in fear when we refuse to face it, rise above it, and walk through it with courage. The greatest weapon against the witch's influence is not found in external battles, but in the courage to face the truths we've been avoiding, the wisdom to recognize when we've been deceived, and the strength to embrace growth and transformation. We must understand that growth is not optional. It is the key to breaking free from the forces that seek to bind us. Change is not to be feared, it is to be welcomed. For it is through change that we evolve, that we find new strengths, and that we build a future that is no longer dictated by past fears or outdated beliefs. We have within us the power to break the chains of fear and manipulation, to rewrite the narrative of our lives, and to walk boldly into the freedom that comes with knowing our true worth and potential. We must rise above the witch's influence, not by fighting the shadows they cast, but by stepping into the light of our own strength. Remember, the witch can only thrive as long as we remain in darkness. But once we choose to stand in the light of truth, once we decide to face our fears and move forward in growth, we reclaim the power that is rightfully ours. The witch may try to deceive us, control us, or hold us back, but they can never win against the unwavering power of a mind that knows its worth, a heart that beats with purpose, and a spirit that refuses to be confined. The time has come to break free. The time has come to grow. The time has come to step into our true power. And in doing so, we dispel the darkness forever.